Good morning, Matt, and welcome to session 2 of the lockdown sessions. Great to have you here. I'm recording these sort of mini bite-sized videos, really, just to sort of help people in the best way we can, just to get through the next few weeks, months, whatever we've got left. We now find ourselves in lockdown number 3. We had a lockdown in November. Christmas was a little bit cancelled. We've now got a semi-permanent work from home on the go as well. So I'm really delighted to have you here today to have a quick sort of chat really around communication and work from home. So before we get started, can you just introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite, Tim. Pleasure to be here. So I founded a company called Renkai Group, and we are specialists of work with fast growth SMEs, and we're really working with them to ensure that they've got the right people strategy model to support their growth ambitions, and for us we're looking at that holistically. So it's really important for us, those businesses, are thinking about the engagement of employees, thinking about developing great leaders and the leadership development, and what underpins all of that is creating the right culture. So not just a culture for growth and innovation, but a culture for where employees feel like they're progressing and their well-being and all those things are considered. So we spend all of our time speaking to SMEs in around those areas with different people wanting to focus on different things.
Okay. Now when I was, we've done a couple of sessions before together, and certainly communication's always been at the forefront of it. When I've worked with my clients and when I've run businesses in the past, communication is key, whether it be business plans or new employees or leavers, and it's the things that we can do well are communicating on email, Teams, that sort of thing. But what I fear we're missing in this remote work from home type environment is like what I would call a passive communication. What sort of tips would you have for employees who are in disparate teams to kind of keep up with what's going on?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? So I just spoke to 2 brand new clients today who've sort of come through, who have approached us to ask for some help, and both of them have just said to us, feels like March again.
Right.
So and that's as you referred, there's been a few different lockdown stages, but to go straight into 2 brand new calls with people and feeling like that, because they literally have to send their teams home again, and they don't know when they're coming. Yeah. So I think the first thing we're going to acknowledge is that people are going to be deflated. I myself had 8 face-to-face meetings booked in the diary in January, and
same here.
all go virtual, which we'll make the best of it. So I think the first thing to understand is that everybody's going to be feeling deflated. So there has to be. It is almost repeating what we were advising people to right the way back then, where we didn't know how badly people would be affected from working from home. So what we've got now is the hindsight of, if you talk about when people worked from home initially, everyone made the best of it, but as soon as people got the chance to come back, overwhelmingly most people did. So if you acknowledge that people really, whereas people thought at the start, well, it'll be nice to work from home and that'll be my new way of working forever, I think most people would acknowledge that actually they know that that's not the ideal scenario, and then now they're not going to be given that choice over the next few months to go back into the office 2 days a week, for example. I think you just got to start with rallying the troops and really go over the same lessons, and from a communication perspective, I think there's some key principles to think about. But I think a communications plan is a key point where I would recommend people start, and that a communication strategy sounds very grand, but a communication plan is, what do we as a team want to be communicating to each other week on week, and why is it important? Why is our Friday get together with some beers important? People need to understand the purpose of these things. We'll always go back to purpose. So I think getting all the team together as a starting point to almost say, well, what should be our new communications plan is a really good way to start with everybody together. And I think what does communication mean to different people? So as you say, some people would prefer an email, some people would prefer a call, some people would prefer a text. WhatsApp, whatever, Slack, all these channels exist in businesses. So I think understanding in a business what options are available to you, and is there what do people feel is appropriate time to use certain ones or another? Just setting those boundaries, setting those clarity, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Clarity about what systems are available for people to use to communicate.
Okay.
So that's the first step.
Would you recommend sticking some rules in place? Because certainly when I've worked in project management before, and you're working on a stage, you will agree with the team what methods of communication are acceptable for what. So, for example, you won't get an update report on email from one guy and on Teams from another person, for example. So, would you recommend setting some rules in place for when to use which tools?
100%. And the most important thing to do with any sort of rule or standard you're setting, which again we see people often don't do as well as they would have liked, is the clarity of that, reinforcing the communication for this business process we require it to be this way into communication. And again, getting everyone together to reinforce that so it becomes that new habit. That's really, really important. The point I was going to sort of then go on to say though is I think on a one-to-one personal basis, finding out to people when do they want to communicate with you. Sounds like a really straightforward thing, but me personally, me and my wife, I'm a morning person, she's not a morning person, okay? So the reality is if I get up early and I'm sitting at my desk at 7, I've got 2 hours of really, really good productive time that I'm really, really, I'll get my really good results from. So with that in mind, do I really want to jump on a half-hour Zoom call at 9 o'clock? Not necessarily. So if you take the time to understand on a more individual level, when are people's best focus times, and when would they be most engaged with communicating with people under whatever term, that can be really, really helpful. Because it makes the quality of the communication on a one-to-one or a team basis much better. And what's the purpose of communication? People need to get the message you're trying to put across. And so I think that's something that I often see people, they have a this is our rule, a Monday morning weekly kick-off, Friday afternoon wrap-up, and there's a very, very, and they think, we'll do it consistently, and they think that's going to get the best results, but actually sometimes there's some opportunity to personalise that further. And also understanding how do people personally like to be communicated to the best. If some people are ultimately visual or whatever, they're going to probably prefer to have an email or have some points put across to them, bullet points that they can review at their leisure. If some people need to talk through or they typically ask lots of questions, you're always going to be better off communicating that via a phone call or a Zoom call. So I think the key thing that we'll be saying to people again now over the next few weeks as we've all gone back into this is take that time to understand what individuals want. You can't please everybody all the time, of course, but I think most clients we speak to don't really take the time to get that bespoke understanding. Okay.
What about sort of because again, when you're in a team, and you're actually in the office, you learn a lot by listening to what's going on. You can kind of chip in and out of other people's conversations. How would you recommend sort of peer-to-peer communication on like an informal level?
So I guess there's the principle of that, and we would agree with that. Again, going back to my earlier point, some people would say that they would really value that. Which some people would say, well, no, I'm in the zone. I don't want the distraction.
Don't want distraction. Yeah, good
and that's
point.
where people say, I'm more productive working from home. Historically, they would always follow that with, I have less distractions. Okay, so homeschooling kids excluded. that is often the difference between the home office environment. So but I think again, find out what people want. If a person's more junior, of course, the general dynamic would be that they would be learning by osmosis.
That's right.
And it's the informal learning they're hearing from working around people. They're not. And if their manager or their team leader acknowledges that that's a gap they've got, and that if they had an ideal scenario, they would be doing that, then the reality is you just really you can get online together via Teams, via Zoom, where you just got the connection open and you're both still going about your work, but it allows for that.
Okay.
I guess more social chit chat, question asking. You can just whatever, you could have music on, whatever. So there's those little workarounds. You can take that further. There's technologies for things like a technology solution called like Worker, and there's other ones that have popped up, and that really creates the virtual office environment. So in those scenarios, people almost kind of they all log in at the start of the day, and they're all constantly connected throughout that period.
Okay.
And they could also then have breakout, meeting rooms and stuff like that. So it's really just taking on that technology solution to the further level. So I guess for me, that would be, if somebody was coming to me saying, well, we're really missing this, and so says they would really like this, that would be the first step I would do in a virtual environment.
Okay.
Really.
That's a really key one, and the session that I did yesterday, in fact, was more on sort of mental health, and when you've got people, single people, no wife, no kids, they may have been isolating over Christmas. They certainly weren't seeing all their family members, and now they're potentially having to face another 6 to 8 weeks at home on their own. If you're not in a role that requires constant communication with your team, it can feel quite isolating, to use that word. So what was that tool you suggested? Worker is just one of the tools that we've helped clients look at. I think that was, and certainly in that first wave, a load of those popped out. Yep.
So it's Worker, is it WUKR, I think it is.
Can you send me a link for that, and I'll stick it in the post as well.
Of course, can.
Okay.
But as I say, before you go and I guess almost invest in that, like anything, let's do a trial. So,
Okay.
Teams or Zoom would allow you to open that initial connection, and as you say, I think the feedback we've had from people, you're not required to look at the camera during that period. People, but you can still have cameras on so people can see if people are actually there at their desk still and all that. But you just then carry on going about your work.
I like that idea. And that's good. And that kind of feeds into my last question really, which is obviously the all important culture. If you've got a team culture that's very much team players, office banter, everyone looking out for each other, how do people maintain that in work from home?
Yeah, it's a challenging one, isn't it? And I think that is, from my experience, quite team specific.
Yep.
So a bit of a younger team, or certain groups or dynamics, they would flag that as a much bigger loss in a remote environment. And I think in that scenario, looking at clients, I think you just create more instances of the informal get together. So you might even have breakouts, 15 minutes at a time, once or twice a day, where you're all literally getting together to talk about, where you've got to in your gaming or the football or whatever.
Just completely non-work related, yeah.
But again, so there's a level of going back to your question about rules at the start. There's a level of formalising it, and so 11 o'clock, 11 to 11:15. If you want to go together and have some, have a chat, that's fine. And so people aren't obliged to be part of it, but those people who need that break can do that. So I guess those are the little workarounds that we've seen clients do. And as you say, if it's a team that typically doesn't need that, and you say to them do that, the momentum of that will fizzle out very quickly.
Yeah. You're right. You've got to get buy-in from everyone for it to actually take off.
Or at least a group of people, and typically those people are friends anyway, on that work friends capacity. So I think going back to your point about the rules, we've got to acknowledge that, and certainly a lot of our clients are back, regardless whether you're in work or not, a lot of people, if your friendship group's on furlough, the WhatsApp traffic is bigger now than it was before any lockdowns. So I think one of the rules I would really recommend is trying to, in reality, try and ring fence and close off WhatsApp in core parts of the day.
Yeah.
And so if you have then got a channel like a Slack or something like that has, it's a work focus, but it's still got that social chat aspect, then just to try and, you can't change your behaviour. People like to communicate by that media these days, but also try to ring fence, so you're not also seeing updates about your fantasy football.
Well, you know what, you and I, before we press record, we talked about bloody WhatsApp groups, and particularly at the moment, there's a lot of negativity in the groups, particularly some of the school groups, and people predicting the future. We're going to be locked down till summer. It's going to be this. It's really not what you want to be hearing. So I've taken WhatsApp off my desktop now, and I think certainly if companies can do the same thing, and you try and push your communication through different channels, because if you've got a company WhatsApp group and people see stuff from their mates or whatever, it can be a distraction, can't it?
Yeah, and just on a wider context, things that we've seen work well in the last proper lockdown of what businesses learned through trial and error. The quizzes came and went. I'm not saying I was ever a big advocate of those. I still don't think I've done a single Zoom quiz, which I'm maybe going to keep that tradition. But one of the things that we found that employees valued, so of course they're generally going to be in daily, weekly contact with their team leader or their direct colleagues. But then, they didn't have that accidental interaction with other people,
Yep.
or they certainly didn't have that, you know, accidental input or seeing those more senior people or leadership team in the office. So two things that we've seen work really well and actually have stood the test of time in terms of momentum is that commitment to that regular all teams get together,
Okay.
be that once a month or once every 2 weeks, where you are getting together to celebrate success and progress.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah,
And
I like
that's
that.
dynamic. It's not business updates. It's good to your point, acknowledging that there's a lot of negativity out there. Move that way. Just get together to talk about the progress we've made. And the ambitions of that progress, let's be frank, are probably less than they were in February 2020. But it's still things to celebrate. So we've seen that work really well, okay, and they're still going today. But also, over a period of time, rather than maybe be once a month where it's the MD providing an update, is on almost like a rotation basis, going through the different leadership team, and they have a, you know, they're available, you know, once a month on a Zoom call that people aren't necessarily all obliged to be on, but they can join, where they're hearing, you know, they're hearing the business update or the progress or from that person's perspective. So what it's doing is it's keeping teams more informed of what's going on in other parts of the business, which then makes it more likely that they would maybe reach out to colleagues at an employee level to maybe offer some support or input. Because, you know, if you're not in office together and understanding that or seeing the chat around the canteen or whatever, we found those instances were going and people started to lose a lack of understanding of what the other teams were doing. So I think that's something that we would recommend, you know, looking at if you're not doing it already, really.
Okay, that's a good tip. I mean, we could talk for literally hours on this subject. That is that's enough for this short session. So Matt, thank you very much for joining us. I will stop recording.
My pleasure.